but it's not like the journalists are ignoring the whole uncertainty issue. In relation to comparisons to other environmental or health risks, very few articles in the United States, 26% in the United States and 41% in the UK, included comparisons to GMOs, biotech, or genetic engineering. So not much in the United States, not so, a fair amount in the UK. And as far as asbestos is concerned, only 12% of the articles mentioned it in the United States as a comparison, while 20% of the UK articles mentioned it. Other comparisons were nuclear power and the internet as possibilities of comparisons, but not much. So again, this fear that the government has had that this will be like GMOs, well, that's not being drawn very much by the media at all, that connection. Okay, let's go to the next one, which is about societal risks. And let me tell you, if you remember back to what words we searched for, we did not search for any words on societal risk. These kept coming up over and over again in our articles related to environmental and health risks. And so we decided to code them. And then we went back and did a separate search and added societal risk on there and found that there was very little difference if we searched for it directly or if we just left the study the way it was. And since we already had 4 years of study in, we decided we kind of leave it this way. But what we think is happening is that when people are talking about risk, they're grouping things together. And so when they talk about environment and health, they're also almost automatically going to start talking about societal risks, and you find these societal risks discussed in about 72% of the articles. So it is important, an important issue, and in looking back on what we're going to do next, we may indeed look at this a bit differently and add this in as a search term all on its own. So what kind of societal risks are we talking about? Here is where we saw the greatest difference between the two countries, and some of these are actually statistically significant, although we don't have the numbers here for you. You can see the UK seems to be much more concerned in its articles, at least its articles seem to be more concerned about societal risks, ethical, social, runaway technology, and safety issues than the U.S. The thing that surprises me is so little discussion of occupational or worker risk, and very little else on legal. Privacy is surprisingly low as well, although more in the United States than in the UK. Now, again, this is only through 2006. I suspect that some of these discussions will be changing in 2007 and 2008. So, what do we find as another issue coming up, which actually turned our study upside down and made us add 13 pages onto our coding document in 2005, and that was regulation. We knew regulation was coming and we had been coding for it, but we didn't realize it was going to be coming in the degree that it did come in fairly quickly. Now, those numbers look pretty small. But look at the jump in the United States between 2005 and 2006. We do have 44% of all of the articles now talking about regulation, but in particular, the regulation is much more being discussed in the United States than in the UK articles. In 2006, those regulation articles represented 65% of all the U.S. articles published that year in 2006. Most of the calls for regulation were about, one would expect, health, environment, and safety issues. Next one. Now, We coded for regulation in three different ways. We coded, or based on three different topics. One was calls for new or tightened regulations. Another was non-governmental plans or strategies for better regulation. And the last one was actual governmental regulatory activities. And we even broke those down into preliminary activities, to activities that are being passed, activities that continue, and so on. But we're going to do, most of the last two categories were small. So all we're going to show you now is the one for calls for new or tightened regulations. We expect the other categories to grow in the next 2 years. And you can see here that number is definitely growing in the United States. It was fairly high in the UK in 2004 and has dropped off. Next. Now, the groups that are calling for these new and tightened regulations are interesting. In the United States, we lumped environment and consumer groups together, so they tended to be the largest group. In England, in the UK, the Scientific or Engineering Society was primarily the Royal Society. And then we have university scientists or engineers, and we expect that category to grow quite a bit in the next year or two. So we'll take a look at that some more based on some of our source data, which we're not ready to present yet because it's not fully analyzed. So these are the groups that are making these calls. One would expect the environmental consumer groups to say that. The nonprofit or think tank group in the United States is primarily the Woodrow Wilson Group, the Project on Emerging Nanotechnologies. And of course, the city or state group up at the top is Berkeley. Okay. And the reasons for are pretty, pretty general kinds of things: protect health and safety, protect the environment. But look at the third one from the bottom, and that is existing rules or regulations do not apply. This is an interesting category. We think we're going to see more of that, and again, it's more prevalent in the United States. Not a lot yet here, but still an interesting kind of breakdown so far. I was surprised that give the country a competitive edge didn't come through very large, that we needed to increase public confidence didn't come through very much, that we needed to reassure the public and allay fears wasn't there very much, and again, workers, not very much. So it'll be interesting to see how this evolves with this growing discussion of regulation, particularly in the United States. Next slide. One of the things we found that we're tracking is that when the number of articles on regulation increased, since there wasn't a huge overall increase in the number of articles, we figured, well, something else has got to drop. And so we started looking around for what might be dropping. And if you follow the blue line are articles based on scientific studies, which were highest in 2004 and are now, and dropped off in 2005 and 2006. We went to the virtual Journal of Nanotechnology, Environmental and Health and Safety on the ICON website just to double check and to say, well, we still think there are lots of scientific studies out there being published, just to make sure that there wasn't a drop in the number of studies, and there wasn't. So what we're seeing here is a drop in the number of studies being covered by the media, and instead a rise in articles on risk regulations and on secondary reports that are being published about risk, again by the Woodrow Wilson Group, by Consumer Reports, and by others. And so they're going to secondary data rather than to original scientific data from the journals and reporting on those. I'm not sure that will continue either, but I think it probably will. So let's come to some conclusions. It's pretty obvious that the number of articles has been quite small. We looked at, in total, if you run Lexis and you just put in the keyword nanotechnology in the same publications for the same time period, for a very rough and not very, really bad, but still base number, you get about 3,600 articles. Well, we only have about 7% of those 3,600 articles during the same time period. And yes, the number of risk articles increased in 2006, but I hate to tell you that it did not continue in 2007.